Dr. Alan Williams is a sixth-generation family farmer and farm consultant and a partner in Joyce Foods right here in the Carolinas. He was an early pioneer of regenerative grazing protocols and forage finishing techniques, and now teaches those practices and principles in the U.S. and across the globe. He's worked with more than 4,000 farmers and ranchers on operations ranging from just a few acres to over 1 million, with an emphasis on whole farm and whole ranch planning. Alan served a combined 15 years on the faculty at Louisiana Tech and Mississippi State Universities. He holds a BS and MS in animal science from Clemson University and a PhD in livestock genetics from LSU. He's authored more than 400 scientific and popular press articles, including for publications such as Graze, Stockman Grass Farmer, and The Organic Broadcaster. And his major research and business focuses are soil health, cover crop and livestock integration, adaptive forage and grazing management, pasture-based meat production, and alternative marketing systems. Together, these approaches are central to the idea of regenerative agriculture, farming that partners with nature to build soil health, enhance ecosystem diversity, capture carbon and nitrogen from the atmosphere, promote livestock health and welfare, protect water resources, produce nutrient-dense foods, and provide farmers a fair return on their labors. This is the model of resilient farming that our plants, our people, and our planet need today more than ever. And we're thrilled to have Alan here with us at the Sustainable Agriculture Conference this year. Please join me in a warm Carolina welcome for Dr. Alan Williams.
Good evening. How is everyone? Good. All right, so I'm going to have to be ambidextrous tonight because I've got to advance slides here and then advance them there. So if I mess up anybody, just let me know if I don't have the right slide that I'm talking about. But it's a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. My partners and I get the opportunity to speak all over the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and many other countries in the world. And it's always good to be back home because I do hail from the other Carolina, South Carolina. Born and raised near Rock Hill, South Carolina, on my family farm. They've been there since 1840, and still operating and still going strong there. So that's part of why I do what I do today, because of that family heritage. I value the opportunity for young people to be able to come back home to the family farm or to even start your own new farms and agricultural and food businesses. That's absolutely critical. And I will have to tell you now, I was born in 1960, so I'm part of that baby boomer generation, but I'll have to tell you that today I firmly believe, in spite of all the challenges that we face in agriculture, especially in commodity and conventional agriculture, I believe that we are living in a time when young people have the greatest opportunity in agriculture and food, and you need to embrace that. So, now I do want to tell you just a quick little story here before I really get rolling. Don Jackson, where are you? Yeah, I know he's in the building somewhere here, but okay, there we go, Don. Okay, so now I showed one of the Soil Carbon Cowboys films in my session this morning that featured Don and his family. It's called Givers and Takers. If you haven't seen the Soil Carbon Cowboys film series, we've got 9 films out and numerous others coming, so please take advantage of that. They tell the real-life stories of farmers and ranchers who have made the transition to regenerative agriculture, and it tells their challenges and the issues, why they did it, and the outcome of what they did. And Don is one of those, and he's continuing to carry that bar and to move forward. But I'll have to tell you, in the early years when he and I first met, and I was telling him about regenerative agriculture and adaptive grazing that I'm going to be talking about tonight, he said, well, Alan, he said, I want to come see this actually being done. So I want to come to your farm there in Mississippi and where I live now, and I want to see this in practice. And so we arranged a time for Don to come. And he shows up and he pulls up in my barnyard there and he says, "Now, Alan," he says, "I don't want you to hide anything from me at all. I want to see absolutely everything." And I happened to look over in one of our barns over there, and we have this old World War II era Stearman biplane, and it's getting a little ragged now. Well, not a little ragged, a lot ragged. But I said, "Don, I've got an idea." I said, "If you really want to see everything," I said, "let's go up in the plane. We'll take a bird's eye view first, and then we'll land, and then we'll get in the truck and go around, and see everything on the ground." He took one look at that plane and one look at me, and he said, "I'm not going to do that." And I said, "Don, why won't you go up with me in my plane?" He said, "Alan, no, sir." And I said, "Don, now you believe in God, right?" He said, "Well, Alan, you know I do. Yeah, I believe in God." I said, "Well, why won't you go up in my plane?" And he said, "No, sir, I'm not going to do it." And I said, "Well, Don, if you believe in God, you believe he's not going to take you till your time comes, right?" And Don said, "Well, yeah, I guess that's right." And I said, "Well, then what's wrong? Why won't you go up with me in the plane?" And Don looked at me and he said, "Alan, I think there's something you haven't thought of." And I said, "Well, Don, what's that?" And he said, "What if we get up there in your plane and your time comes?" I couldn't argue with him. What do you say to that? So, our soil health practices are a reflection of ourselves and our stewardship of the land. And that's what my partners and I believe. We have a consulting company called Understanding Ag and a nonprofit called the Soil Health Academy. And this is what we live by every day and what we practice and what we preach. Now, we work in a number of areas. As Roland said, we work with thousands of farmers and ranchers all over the world. But we also work with a number of conservation organizations such as Audubon, and we actually wrote and developed the Audubon Conservation Ranching Program and the Bird-Friendly Grazing Certification, so farmers and ranchers can now become Audubon bird-friendly certified. We've worked with Trout Unlimited to utilize regenerative grazing practices to restore streams and fisheries. We've worked with Ducks Unlimited, various state DNRs and wildlife departments, Quail Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, BLM, and so forth. So it's been a distinct privilege to be able to work with all of those organizations, and especially some of these that in the past were very antagonistic to agriculture, particularly to livestock agriculture. And now they fully see the benefit of utilizing the right kind of grazing, the right kind of management to have habitat restoration, not just with our soil, but with our water, with plant species, and our wildlife. Now, I'm a big fan of Wendell Berry. Wendell's in his 80s now. He had a 2018 New York Times op-ed where Wendell said, "Agricultural choices must be made by these inescapable standards: the ecological health of the farm and the economic health of the farmer." And then this guy, Masanobu, I consider him to be the Wendell Berry of Japan, but I really love this quote where he says, "An object seen in isolation from the whole is not the real thing." Now, I spent 15 years in academia. I was a full tenured professor when I left, and I'll have to tell you, from my academic years and from what we've been doing in agricultural research and many other types of research as well, this includes medical and nutritional research, but also what we've been doing as farmers and ranchers. Over the last 70 plus years, unfortunately, many have found themselves in the situation, in the mindset, where we have been viewing objects in isolation instead of the whole. And that has caused us to reach some very erroneous conclusions and to do some things that have been very degrading to the soil and to our environment as a whole. So tonight, and I know this is what you're about with this organization, you're about seeing the whole and not objects in isolation. And then this is what we're about, the why. We always ask this question, why? Why do we see what we see? Why are certain things happening? And then we start asking, how can we alter things to make significant progress? Now, I also love this quote: "Imperfect people are all God ever has to work with, and that must be terribly frustrating to him, but he deals with it, and so should we." So. Okay, now there's a whole host of issues that we have to deal with today, and I'm not going to spend any time on these. You know what they are. But things like climate change, and we see every day, increasing incidents of floods, fires, erosion, drought, dust storms, extreme temps. We have an eroding agricultural economy as a whole that is increasing farmer depression and suicide. We have the issue with fake meats, growing consumer distrust of the food system, food safety failures, disease issues, manure and effluent issues. All of these things are impacting the agricultural community. And some of the current issues that we face this year. For instance, again, I live in Mississippi, and we farm and ranch in Mississippi and Alabama. And this was one of the things that significantly impacted our economy on the Gulf Coast. Because of all the flooding in the upper Midwest and the Midwest, all of that drains down through the Mississippi River, and then is highly concentrated. So all of the water, all of the leaching from the nitrates, the phosphates, the sediment, the pharmaceuticals, so on and so forth, glyphosate, you name it, it all funnels down and highly concentrates right there and spews into the Gulf. And this resulted in an enormous cyanobacteria bloom in the Gulf of Mexico, and we ended up this year with a dead zone of greater than 7,000 square miles. Now, what this did was, starting at the very 1st of July, at the peak of tourist season, which our coastal communities absolutely rely on for their economies, at the peak of our tourist season, our beaches were closed down all the way through the month of July and all the way until early October. So many of our vendors and hotels and restaurants and so forth down there missed a ton of tourist dollars this year. So this was devastating to our economy. But not only was it devastating to our economy, but it was also devastating to the marine life down there. We had more than a 400% increase in river flow rates. And all of that freshwater incursion with everything that it was carrying created significant loss of marine life. This included dolphins, sea turtles, crabs, and many others. So we had to suffer through all of that. And this is what the dead zone looked like. You can see in the upper right-hand corner of the slide the massive area of North America that is drained by the Mississippi River drainage basin into the Gulf of Mexico. And the bottom right-hand slide, you can see that edge of the dead zone there in the Gulf. So you can literally see the dead zone. It is that visible. And then we also had this, everywhere from the upper Midwest all the way down through the lower Mississippi Delta, and in the state of Mississippi, in the Delta region, for most of the year, we had more than 600,000 acres that was flooded. And so many of those farmers had to take prevent plant and things like that. And this was in our news in the state of Mississippi over and over and over, from our governor to all of our officials, ag officials, and everybody else on down. And they kept talking about the solutions. But do you know what the solutions proposed were? They were to build bigger, wider levees and to install massive pumps. Now, folks, I call that a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. You are treating symptoms and not the cause. There is not a levee built by man. There is no engineer alive that is smart enough, intelligent enough to build a levee that the force of water cannot breach. So if we build bigger, wider levees and call that a solution, they will be breached. It's not if, it's when. And when they are breached, now we have even more water coming down, and the devastation that would unfold as a result of that would result in far more loss of life and loss of property than we experienced already. And then if you pump the water off, well, who in the heck are you pumping it on to? Boy, isn't that being a great neighbor, right? We're going to pump it off, but we got to pump it onto somebody or pump it out in the Gulf and kill more marine life and cause more dead zone. So that's not a solution. The real solution, as we know here, is solve the soil health problem. Solve the water infiltration problem that we have. That's the real solution. But at the same time, okay, now get the irony in this, folks. At the same time that we had all of these devastating floods in the same states, okay, I want you to know that. We also have massive dust storms. Now, only one of those pictures on these slides up here is from the 1930s dust storm. It's the one in black and white, top left. The rest of them are from 2011 and on to this year. Every year, we have had more and more massive dust storms here in the U.S. They're not abating, they're growing in nature and growing in force. So what I often tell people is we are now, even though we don't recognize it and realize it, we're now in the middle of our second Dust Bowl here in the U.S. And this is one of the reasons. All across the U.S., North America, and globally, we are seeing this excessive tillage. I call it recreational tillage, okay? Many farmers like to plow just to plow, okay? So recreational tillage, but this is what we're seeing, and it's contributing not only to the dust storms, but also to the flooding, because this is eroding our soils, this is crashing the microbiological populations in our soils, it's crashing the soil aggregate layer and the ability to be able to infiltrate water. And this is what it's resulting in. This is from a half-inch of rainfall, a half inch, okay? We can't infiltrate a half inch of rain anymore, and it ponds and pools like this. We can't keep on like that. And then we teach soil health academies all across the U.S. and many other countries monthly, and last November we were teaching a soil health academy out in Chico, California. So my partners and I flew into Sacramento, landed there. It's about a 140-mile drive from there up to Chico, and this is what we saw the entire 140 miles, driving up through the famous Central Valley of California, where the vast majority of America's produce is grown, right? This is what we saw, mile after boring mile after boring mile. Plowed up, tilled up dirt that is absolutely pulverized and beat to death. That's what we saw. But driving along, and I was driving, I had the rental vehicle, and my partners, Gabe Brown and Ray Archuleta and others were there in the vehicle with me, and they had been lulled half to sleep. And all of a sudden I saw something, and I knew I had to stop, so I swerved to the side real quick, slammed on the brakes, threw them in the floorboard, and they were, "What? What's going on?" And I said, "Look, a California pollinator strip. We found it. One lone brave sunflower, okay, daring to grow in all of this bare soil." So we got out and looked at it, and guess what? There were 3 honeybees on it. So somehow we had 3 very desperate, starving bees that found that lone sunflower. So now, one of the things that we like to do is we like to approach things from what we call a historical ecological perspective, okay? Historical ecological perspective. And the reason we do this is because if we view things today only in light of what we have seen in our lifetime, we will be very wrong in terms of what can be accomplished in the restoration of our ecosystems and our biology. You have to look much, much further back. In North America, in many regions of the country, we have had more than 400 years of degradation of our soils and our ecosystems. So we have to look back a minimum of 500 years to understand what can we really restore these ecosystems and soils too. And so we spend a lot of time doing that. And one of the things, again, I farm in Mississippi and Alabama now, and so we have spent a lot of time, I have, looking at those two states in particular, as well as all over North America. But what we have discovered is that if we go back 500 plus years before European settlement in those states, that they were not this vast unbroken forest that was dense and choked and thick, but rather it was made up of a network of tall grass prairies, savannas, wooded savannas that were easy to traverse through, and wetlands, okay? And so was the vast majority of the Southeast, including right here in North Carolina. You were no different. Beaver played a very critical role, not just in the Southeast, but all over the U.S. We started having fur trappers in earnest in the 1400s here in North America, and by the time settlers started traveling across the Oregon Trail in the 1840s and 50s, they saw an environment, an ecosystem out west that was nothing like what it was just 200, 300 years earlier. It had already been severely devastated due to the loss of beavers, okay? So it was, what they saw then was not even a reasonable facsimile of what the West was 200 years prior. And right here in the East, not just in the West, in the Midwest, but we were filled with bison, elk, deer, and antelope. They roamed from the Atlantic to the Pacific and south of the Arctic Circle to the Gulf Coast, and they had a significant impact. So what I'm telling you is that all of North America and much of our land mass around the globe was developed, those ecosystems were developed in concert with grazing and foraging animals. And they are critical yet today for an intact, fully functioning ecosystem. We can't have it without that impact. We know a lot of things from the Spanish, like Hernando de Soto and so forth, when the Spaniards made their early explorations. The rapidity at which they moved through the deep south tells us that these forests were not dense and choked, but rather open savannas, because they moved with a large army of 800 plus men, all the support wagons, and a herd of 500 plus pigs. That's where we got our lovely wild pigs in the Southeast from, okay? Courtesy of the early Spanish explorers. And now we know that in these eastern prairies, we actually had far more grass species and plant species than the Midwestern tall grass prairies did at one time. So that's the historical ecological perspective. And we're doing a lot of work restoring savannas in the Southeast and all of that, and this is a picture of one of those. Now, these trees would not even be close to the size of the pines and oaks and other trees that once existed, but hopefully they'll get there one day. But this is how open these savannas were, these woodlands. But yet, I remember as a child in elementary school, if we look over on the left-hand side of these slides there, I was taught that a squirrel could start at the Atlantic Ocean in a tree and go all the way to the Mississippi River, never touching the ground. That's how densely wooded the entire eastern half of the U.S. was, and that is incorrect. That was not true. Not true at all. And we have far too many written accounts to show that that was absolutely not true. So what we're about to now is complete restoration of the carbon cycle, okay? And we're doing that by simulating nature. Again, that's another reason for the studying of this historical ecological perspective. How did nature do it thousands of years ago? That's the same way we need to do it today. So these pictures, the bigger picture on the right-hand side was taken by a good friend of mine last year, Dr. Jason Roundtree. He took this in, he was over in South Africa in Botswana. This is a large herd of wildebeest, but this, imagine North America 500, 1,000 years ago. This is what we look like, folks. This is what you would have seen even here in North Carolina. Massive herds of wild grazing ruminants just like this, okay? And then we know from written historical accounts by Lewis and Clark, Charlie Siringo, and many others, their exploration parties encountered migrations like this of both bison and antelope. Bison and antelope herds so massive that they stopped their exploration parties for a day or more at a time, crossing in front of them. So that's how large these herds used to be. And these were the herds that built the ecology of North America, and these were the herds that built the massive fertility and water infiltration and soil aggregation that our ancestors once encountered and that we have since tried and succeeded in degrading. So we practice biomimicry and ecomimicry. We'll never again, unfortunately, have those massive large herds of free-roaming wild ruminants. That can't happen. We've got cities and towns and roads and homes and farms and fences and everything else. But what we can do is we can use our domesticated livestock to simulate what those wild ruminants once accomplished here. And so what does it look like? We have varying stock densities, that we utilize from 100,000, 250,000, 500,000, 1 million pound stock density and so forth, and many other stock densities that we practice to again mimic what nature once did here. So I want to talk to you about soil health and adaptive stewardship. Many of you are familiar with the principles of soil health. I'm not going to spend much time on those. There were originally 5 principles: minimize soil disturbance, keep soil covered, increase diversity, living roots in the soil year-round, integration of livestock. But my partners and I added a 6th one that we believe is the most important, and that is context. You must know your context. If you want to make a significant impact on building soil health, context and defining your context is critical. And the reason why we do this is because we want to restore full soil microbial function. And after all, we want to do that because that is the foundation of our entire food web. And it is the determiner of real soil health. And I say that to say this. Today, we have a lot of pretenders in the soil health world. There's a lot of people because the term soil health has become very popular and very popular with consumers. So is the term regenerative, okay? So we have a lot of people that are usurping those terms and taking them on themselves. But do you know how do you tell the pretender from the real? One simple way. If they never mention and they don't practice building a soil biology, and if that is not first and foremost on their agenda, they are a pretender. They are not real. The only way you build real soil health is you start with biology. That is it. Okay, so we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about this, the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. Now again, we've been privileged to work on farms and ranches all over the world, in every country, every environment, every possible scenario that you can imagine, and every kind of crop. So what we have found is that these rules work, and those 6 principles of soil health, those 6 principles and these 3 rules work no matter where you're located, no matter your soil type, no matter your climate, and no matter what you're producing. Okay? If you follow these, you will be successful, no matter where you are. They are the rule of compounding, the rule of diversity, and the rule of disruption. So we're going to talk about these. So the first rule, the rule of compounding. In nature and in biology, there never are any singular effects, ever. Everything that happens is compounding and cascading in nature. And here's the deal, they're also never neutral, okay? They're either positive or negative. Now the good thing is that we have a lot of control over that. The way we manage our farms and our ranches has a lot to do with whether we're going to produce positive compounding and cascading effects or negative compounding and cascading effects. And oh, by the way, this rule applies to our personal lives as well. You can't escape it. Okay, it's every day. For instance, men, how many of you in here are married? Okay, raise your hands, okay? Quite a few of you. All right, so let me ask you a question. What happens if you forget your wife's birthday? Does that ever produce a singular effect? No. That produces a compounding, cascading effect that lasts for the rest of your life. She will never forget the one you forgot, even if you remember all the rest of them, okay? So even in our personal relationships, we cannot escape compounding and cascading effects. The second rule, the rule of diversity. Nowhere on this earth where nature is in control does she produce a monoculture. Nature always produces highly diverse and complex systems everywhere, from the life beneath the soil to the plant life to the animal life, the bird life, and so forth. Complex and diverse. Who is the only creature on the face of this earth that creates a monoculture? It's us. We're it. Okay? We're it. We're not listening to nature, are we? We're fighting against nature. And to do this, this means that in our fields, for instance, we need to have at least 3 of the 4 major functional plant class groups represented at all times. That's grasses, legumes, and forbs. The 4th one is woody species, brush, trees, that type of thing. So we need at least 3 of the 4 at all times rather than these monocultures or just grasses and legumes and that type of thing. It's not enough. It's not enough diversity. And it's not going to rebuild our ecosystems and our soil. So why do we want to do this? Because if we recreate complexity and diversity in our fields, whether they're crop fields or whether they are pastures, then we create very positive compounding and cascading effects. In many different plants, the more plant species we have out there, the greater the secondary and tertiary compounds that are being produced. The work of Dr. Fred Provenza in his book, Nourishment, talks to us about this. And these secondary and tertiary plant compounds are the compounds that are medicinal and anti-parasitic in nature. They allow our plants to be healthier and to resist disease and pest, and they allow our livestock to be far healthier. So it works, cuts across both of those. It creates greater diversity in our microbial species beneath the soil surface, greater diversity in macroorganisms, and the results of that are exponential rather than linear in nature. So these forbs, we all know about grasses and legumes, but what are forbs? Okay, they're commonly called weeds. Now, I always ask this question in a learned group of people, okay? And you all are a learned group of people. So I'm going to ask this question tonight. Define a weed. Somebody, anybody? Plant out of place? Plant you don't want? Plant whose value has not yet been discovered? Plant named by an unhappy person? Okay. Okay. So, here's the deal. You can major in weed science. You can take weed science courses at your land-grant universities and agricultural colleges. We have weed science professors, weed science textbooks, and weed science extension specialists. And no one on God's green earth can define a weed. Every definition I ever get, and every definition I heard tonight, by the way, I've heard them all. So you didn't give me any new ones tonight. But every definition I've heard is purely subjective in nature, and you are the subject, right? If you're a corn and soybean farmer, what's a weed in a cornfield? Anything but corn. My goodness, okay? Anything but corn. But wait a minute. You have a corn bean rotation. Next year you plant soybeans, and what can grow up in the soybeans? Corn. Oh, no, now what is it? Well, no, wait a minute. You just said the year before it wasn't a weed, it was a crop. And now you're saying it's a weed. You get my point? okay? There is no such thing as a weed. What we call weeds are plants that are actually nature's first line of defense. Whenever we scar the soil, whenever we till it, whenever we graze it too tight, or we do anything to scar the soil, what type of plant always grows up first? What we call a weed, right? Why? It is nature's first line of defense. It grows there first because these weeds, these plants we hate and despise, and we want to spray out and plow out and pull up and burn and whatever, these weeds are the most wonderful plant nature gave us. They are the plant intended to do the most rapid healing of the soil possible, and then to pave the way for the other plants to come on after them. That's what they're there for. That's why they grow, okay? So they all have a purpose. So we like to ask, what is nature trying to tell me when something grows there? So dandelions tell us we got compaction and calcium issues. Quackgrass tells us compacted soils. Bindweed, we've got compacted soils. You know, Russian thistle, we've got salinated soil. Leafy spurge, boron. Chicory, calcium. Hairy vetch, cobalt. Plantain, copper. Canada thistle, iodine. Lambsquarter, manganese. Stinging nettle, nitrogen. Giant ragweed, nitrogen, and on and on. So every weed is there for a purpose. Now, let me ask you this. Did I show a weed at all in those last slides that livestock will not eat, including our cattle? Nope, not a one. If we train them to, if we teach them to, they'll eat every one of these, and they're very highly nutritious. And they're highly medicinal and anti-parasitic in nature. They get natural deworming properties and all of that from eating those. So they'll eat all of those. Let me give you an example, okay? This is giant ragweed. Those cows look like they're ignoring that and just, boy, I hate this. I'm going to eat it. I hate this. You know, man, they're chowing down, okay? Giant ragweed. So this is what it looked like as they moved through it under high density. And they left behind this dense, trampled mass of carbon. That's new carbon. That's new organic matter. And so do you know what this farmer did? His name is Clifford. He's one of our clients in Minnesota. He planted his corn crop directly into that, sprayed nothing, applied no fertilizer, not a darn thing, just no-till drilled directly into that trample and produced a corn crop that far surpassed his county average with no fertility or chemical inputs. And he planted non-GM corn, by the way, as well, okay? So diversity is key. We want to see tons of life out there, guys. In our perennial pastures, grasses, legumes, forbs, even woody species. If we're talking about warm season annuals or cool season annuals, if you're planting annuals, you don't want to plant monocultures and near monocultures. You want to plant highly diverse and complex mixes that contain at least 3 of the 4 major functional plant class groups. This is a diverse primer. We call these biological primers, ready to graze. Okay, and when we go on it and graze it, this is the performance. The cattle gain more than 3 pounds per day per head, okay, on this diverse biological primer that, by the way, while they were grazing this, the combination of the plants and the livestock were rapidly building the soil, sequestering carbon, building water infiltration rates, and doing all those great things that we need to restore our ecosystem. The bricks on these plants was greater than 20%. So the third rule, this is the rule of disruption. How many of you were called disruptive as a child? Okay. This is your chance to be disruptive again, okay? You can be disruptive again. Now, the reason we call it the rule of disruption is because what we have found is, number one, nature is resilient, tremendously resilient, and responds well to challenges. And if we introduce planned, purposeful disruptions, we can make amazing progress on our farms and ranches, and continuous progress. Let me give you an analogy here. How many in the room have been athletes? Okay, or are an athlete? Okay, now, let me ask you this question. As an athlete, so I was a collegiate wrestler and a power lifter, and as an athlete, if you do the same exercise routine at the same intensity and duration, day after day, month after month, year after year, are you going to make any progress? No. What's going to happen? You're going to stagnate, aren't you? And then you're not even going to be able to maintain your level of performance, are you? You're going to start going backwards. Okay? If I wanted to be a champion marathon runner, and I went out every single day for 5 years and ran 2 miles at the same pace, will I ever win a marathon? No. Will I likely complete a marathon? No. Okay? If I want to be a champion power lifter, in 3 days a week I go to the gym and load up the bar with 200 pounds and do 10 reps for 4 sets, 200 pounds in a deadlift. Will I ever be able to deadlift 700 pounds? No. Okay? Are we biology? Yes, we are. If you don't know that, the answer is yes. Okay? All right. So, we're biology. Nature is biology. If our bodies require challenges to allow us to be able to push forward, to gain strength and endurance and resilience and so forth, speed, all of that, do you not think nature needs the same thing? If our bodies can stagnate as biology, do you not think our farms, our soils, our plants, our livestock can stagnate as well? Absolutely they do. And here's why. Because every cell in every organism has what is called cellular memory. Cellular memory. And they remember what happened yesterday, the month before, the year before, and the year before that. And if it's the same, it just says, I'm used to this. Nothing new. I don't have to get bigger, faster, stronger, more resilient or anything. I'm used to this. But if you change something, then the biology in the soil and above the soil and the plants and the livestock and everything else say, oh boy, something's changed. I'm going to have to adjust to this so I can do this the next time this may happen. That's cellular memory, okay? So plan purposeful disruptions. So again, that's the third rule. How can we be disruptive in our farming and ranching practices? And this applies no matter what you grow, no matter what you raise, okay? Doesn't matter. You need to be disruptive. So first of all, do not do things the same way every time. But that's our human nature, isn't it? We want a formula, a recipe, a routine. And we want to follow that every time. But if you do that, you're going to hit a wall. And you're going to wonder why you can't push through it on your farm. You're going to wonder what happened. It's because you're following a recipe, a formula. You can't do it, folks. You got to be disruptive. Okay, so what are some of the ways that we can be disruptive? Okay? First of all, if we're grazing, for instance, we can alter stock densities. Okay? Remember I talked about that stock density, pounds per acre. We can alter those on a routine basis. Never have the same stock density time after time. Do not move through your pastures in the same rotation pattern. Cellular memory. Everything remembers. If you started in pasture A in April, it remembers. Okay? Alter your rotation pattern. Alter grazing height on and off. Alter rest periods. We do multi-species on our farms. So cattle, sheep, chickens, goats, pigs, and so forth. We alter the species order from time to time in which we move them through. Alter the time or season of year, okay? If you're growing crops, here are some disruptions. Minimize or eliminate tillage. Now, one of the things that we do on our farms is we have organic market gardens, and we market to restaurants and many other entities. And we do 100% no-till in organic situations. So we're no-till, we plant diverse cover crops, many, many different plant species. We do triads, so every row has at least 3 different species in it. For instance, we may have tomatoes down the middle, basil on this side, lettuce on this side. That confuses pest, confuses disease, okay? So there's a lot of different strategies you can use. Introduce much higher levels of diversity. You can grow a whole lot more things than you think you can grow. Our goal now on our farms is every acre every year should generate a minimum of 6 different revenue streams every year. Where did we become trapped in our farms to believe that any 1 acre can only produce 1 revenue stream annually? How did we get there? You can produce at least 2 to 3 revenue streams for every acre every year. It's not a hard thing to do. And it drives significantly more revenue. And oh, by the way, you make much more rapid progress in building soil health doing that. Much more rapid progress. So introduce higher levels of diversity, crop rotations, cover crop mixes, and so forth. Introduce other forms of biology to your cropping system, such as grazing and foraging animals. And create, as I just talked about, multiple revenue streams per acre. So what is the best tool? And wrapping up, guys, what is the best tool in your toolbox? Well, it is this: simply keen, constant observation. This is an art that we have lost as farmers and ranchers. We have lost the ability to truly observe. Use all your senses: sight, sound, smell, touch, and even taste. I told a little story out there in the pasture this afternoon. I plucked some dog fennel. Everybody knows what dog fennel is. I plucked some dog fennel. A lot of people consider it a terrible weed. And we sell to a lot of chefs. And so we always entertain groups of chefs out on our farms to show them what we do. And they love to use all of these senses as a chef, including the sense of taste. So they go through our pastures and they graze. They pluck plants and put them in their mouth and taste them. And so one of these chefs plucked some dog fennel and he smelled it. Oh, wow, wonderful aroma. What is this? And I didn't want to tell him it was dog fennel, so I just said, it's fennel. Fennel, really? And he put it in his mouth and he tasted it. He said, wow, this is fabulous. He said, we can use this in our restaurants to season meats. He said, how much for this? Can we get it? And I said, well, it's a very rare plant, so it's $20 a pound, okay? So never overlook any revenue stream, okay? You got them all out there. Now, constant keen observation develops intuition. And once you develop intuition, you now make far better decisions, okay? If you observe, and you observe routinely, you will intuitively make better decisions. This is an excerpt from Dr. Fred Provenza's book, Nourishment. I encourage all of you to read it if you have not. Talking about livestock behavior, but he's talking about animals' nutritional wisdom is very different than our perception of what it should be, and he's exactly right. You know, you can take animal nutrition courses in college, you can have the feeds and feeding textbook, you can design TMR rations and all of these other things, and there's not a ration we can design that can even come close to what nature can provide in a diverse plant environment. And oh, by the way, did you know that plants are expert organic chemists? They actually have a very high level of intelligence. Plants practice organic chemistry 24/7, 365 days a year. They're mediating relationships among soil microbes, other plants, and the herbivores that eat them on a continuous basis. And we cannot select by hand a diet as nutritious as that selected by free-ranging cattle, sheep, goats, and so forth in a diverse environment. Fred's work also shows that given the opportunity, all herbivores, including our domestic ones, the livestock that we raise, will eat 30 to 60 or more foods every single day. A lot of some and a little of others. And what they eat will change during the seasons and their needs. And study after study has shown that animals can detect nutritional deficiencies within hours or even minutes and will adjust that given the opportunity. But if we have monoculture pastures and TMR rations, they're not given that opportunity. We have to be able to provide that. And then I'm going to close with this. It's a human nutritional study that Fred did, or that Fred talks about in his book, Nourishment. This was done in the 1930s at an orphanage, so pay attention. This was kids in an orphanage. Very young children, look at this, 1 year to 6 years of age. Okay, again in an orphanage. Now every day, all three meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And when I grew up, there was no such thing as lunch. It was breakfast, dinner, and supper, right? Breakfast, dinner, and supper. But for breakfast, dinner, and supper, these kids, they were offered this entire array that you see here before you, okay? 4 fruits, 10 vegetables, 5 grains, 6 red meats, 1 white meat, 1 fish, bone jelly, bone marrow, sea salt, and 4 drinks. Now, I'm going to submit to you that in the 1930s, those 4 drinks were not Red Bull, Sprite, Coke, and Dr. Pepper, okay? They were milk, and this would have been real milk at this time. They were milk, water, and 2 fruit drinks. And I'm also going to submit that the fruits and vegetables and grains and all of that were far more nutrient dense than what we would put on a table before them today for the most part. Now, I do know that what we ate tonight, though, was far more nutrient dense than what's offered in the vast majority of our grocery stores, and I thank you for that. And my body thanks you for that. So, but today, if we laid this array of foods out, this buffet out in front of kids today, they would look at that table and go, "Where's the food? I don't see hot dogs or pizza or Doritos or anything like that," right? They will be complaining and moaning and groaning. There's nothing to eat. But this is what these kids ate, these young kids, given the opportunity. And guess what? No 2 children ever selected the same foods, and no child ever selected the same mix of foods from day to day. The attending pediatricians, and again, remember, these are kids in an orphanage, not from intact families. The attending pediatricians deemed that these children were extremely well nourished and extremely healthy, both physically and mentally. They called them some of the most well-adjusted kids from the physical and behavioral standpoint they had ever seen. Wow. Wow. It makes all the difference, folks. It makes all the difference. And this sets them up for a lifetime of health. A lifetime of health. So, folks, we have, as I started out tonight, we have incredible opportunity in front of us. Young people, boy, I wish I was 20 again. If I could go back and start knowing what I know now, wow. Hopefully I got a few more decades and I'm going to continue on this. But young people, you've got unbelievable opportunity. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of it. And if you want opportunity, contact us. We'll help you. Understandingag.com, we will help you find that opportunity. Okay? Now, those of you that are farmers and ranchers, you have the most opportunity, again, as I started out this evening, than you've had in decades. you take advantage of that as well. You have markets that you've never had access to before. You have knowledge you've never had access to before. Take advantage of that. Rebuild your soils, rebuild your ecosystems, rebuild your economies, your rural economies, and rebuild your lives. That's what this is all about. And I'm going to end with this. If you're going to change what you do, it takes incentive, right? It takes incentive. It's like a buddy of mine in Mississippi. And this particular friend, he loves to fish. And every chance he gets, he's out on the lake or on the river fishing. Okay? A couple of weeks ago, he was out fishing, and the fish were biting extremely well. So well that he ran out of bait, but he didn't want to go home. His wife had a whole list of honeydews for him, and he wanted to stay out on that lake fishing. So he got to looking around what he could use for bait, and he happened to see this old cottonmouth moccasin on the bank of that lake with a frog in his mouth. And he thought, I can use that frog. So he eased the bow of his boat up over that snake, reached down, grabbed that snake behind his head, pulled him in the boat, yanked the frog out of his mouth, dropped the frog in his bait bucket, and he looked at that snake and he realized he was looking at a very angry snake. And he didn't know how he was going to let that old moccasin go without him biting him. Then he happened to remember that bottle of Jack Daniels he always carries with him fishing. So he reached down there and he grabbed that bottle of Jack Daniels. He poured some down that snake's gullet. And it wasn't long before his eyes rolled back in his head and his whole body went limp. And he just threw him out in the water. And he reached down and grabbed that frog, baited his hook, commenced to fishing again. And it wasn't long before he felt a nudge at his foot. And there was that old snake with 2 more frogs in his mouth. So everything is about incentive, folks. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you for allowing me to be here.